My name is Michael, and for as long as I can remember, I believed that the foundation of a happy life was built upon trust, loyalty, and open communication. I married Sarah when we were both young and full of hope, a union that, in the eyes of everyone who knew us, seemed destined for everlasting happiness. Our early years were filled with shared laughter, dreams for the future, and the quiet confidence that we would navigate all of life's challenges together. However, as the years passed, subtle cracks began to form in our relationship, cracks that would eventually widen into a chasm I never imagined I would have to cross. Sarah had always been a woman of great emotional depth, and although our marriage was strong, she often wrestled with insecurities that she concealed behind a gentle smile. About a year ago, after a period of heightened stress from her demanding job and personal disappointments, Sarah confided in me that she needed help managing her inner turmoil. She decided to seek therapy from a well-respected psychologist, Dr. Alan Carter. At first, I felt reassured knowing that Sarah was taking steps to understand and heal herself. I believed that with professional guidance, the dark corners of her mind would soon be illuminated, and our bond would emerge even stronger. In the early weeks of her therapy, Sarah's demeanor shifted ever so slightly. The vibrant spark that once animated her eyes seemed subdued, replaced by a reflective sadness that she could not quite shake. I noticed her spending long hours lost in thought, often retreating into the quiet of early mornings or the solitude of our late evenings. While I attributed these changes to the introspective nature of her sessions, a quiet unease began to gnaw at me. There were moments when her conversations felt rehearsed, as though she were reciting lines learned from another source, lines that echoed the comforting yet impersonal phrases of Dr. Carter's advice. I remember one particular evening vividly. Rain tapped steadily against our windows as I sat in the living room, reading a book, when I overheard snippets of a conversation on the phone. Sarah's tone was unusually gentle, almost intimate, as if she were confiding secrets not meant for my ears. The words, though fleeting, hinted at an emotional closeness that went beyond that of a typical therapist-client relationship. I struggled to convince myself that it was simply the therapeutic process at work, but the seed of doubt had been planted. As the weeks turned into months, these moments of uncertainty multiplied. I began to notice small discrepancies, a misplaced smile, a lingering glance at her phone, and hesitations when I casually mentioned my day. Each time, I would reassure myself that my suspicions were merely the product of overthinking. After all, Sarah had always been a private person, and the nature of therapy often led to guarded disclosures. Yet, as a husband who had built his life on mutual trust, I could not escape the feeling that something was amiss. I started keeping a mental ledger of the little oddities, the late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, the hushed tones in which she described her sessions, and the sudden need for solitude that had once been rare. Each incident felt like a small betrayal, a sign that the woman I had loved so dearly was drifting away into a world where I no longer belonged. It was as if the secure foundation we had painstakingly built was quietly being undermined from within, one unspoken word at a time. One evening, while reviewing old photographs of happier times, I caught a glimpse of the past, the vibrant smiles, the spontaneous adventures, and the effortless communication. Those images were a stark contrast to the present, where our conversations had become laden with half-truths and unspoken resentments. I began questioning the authenticity of our connection. Was Sarah's growing dependence on Dr. Carter an earnest attempt to heal, or had it inadvertently become a crutch, a means of escape from confronting the deeper issues in our marriage? The more I pondered, the more I realized that my worst fears were taking shape. There was a growing sense that the intimacy we once shared was being replaced by something foreign, something carefully cultivated behind closed doors. In the silence of my thoughts, I wondered if Sarah had found solace not just in therapy but in the comforting presence of someone else, a person whose guidance, though intended for healing, had morphed into something dangerously intimate. I wrestled with these thoughts, torn between my desire to trust and the unsettling evidence that challenged that trust. Every reassuring smile from Sarah now carried a hint of ambiguity, every gentle touch a trace of something lost. It was a slow, painful realization that the woman I had adored for so long was changing, and that change might be steering her away from the promises we had once made to each other. My heart ached with the weight of uncertainty, yet I held on to the hope that love could overcome even the most insidious doubts. The first signs of betrayal, however faint, had begun to crack the facade of our perfect life. Unbeknownst to me, these were just the initial tremors before a seismic shift that would forever alter the course of our lives. And so, as I lay awake in the quiet darkness of our bedroom, I could only brace myself for the inevitable storm that was gathering on the horizon. a storm that promised to shatter the illusions of harmony and force me to confront a truth too painful to accept. The tranquility of our home was gradually replaced by an atmosphere of tension and unspoken questions. I tried to maintain my composure and convince myself that my growing suspicions were nothing more than the natural insecurities of a man who had loved deeply for too long. But as time passed, the evidence became too compelling to ignore. One chilly autumn evening, after Sarah had gone to bed early, I found myself unable to sleep. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind rustling through the trees provided a somber soundtrack to my restless thoughts. With the house enveloped in silence, I ventured into the study, seeking distraction in the familiarity of old books and memories. That's when I saw it, a glimmer of light on Sarah's tablet, left unlocked on the coffee table. My curiosity, once a benign trait, now urged me forward, as I hesitated between respecting her privacy and confronting my fears. Scrolling through her messages, my heart pounded faster as I discovered a series of exchanges that made my blood run cold. There were texts from an unfamiliar number, but more disturbingly, a string of messages exchanged with Dr. Carter. At first, the words appeared to be mundane reminders of therapy sessions. However, as I read further, the tone shifted dramatically. The messages contained language that was personal and affectionate, words that spoke of longing, shared secrets, and promises of being there for one another. I froze, the digital screen burning into my vision, as I realized that these were not mere professional communications. They were the covert whispers of an emotional affair. I sat back in disbelief, trying to reconcile the image of Dr. Carter, the man I had trusted to help Sarah, with the man who was now entangled in this web of intimacy and deceit. The more I read, the clearer it became that Sarah had crossed a line that should have been inviolable. My mind raced through a series of painful questions. Had our shared struggles and the vulnerability of therapy led her to seek solace in the arms of a man who was never meant to be a part of our marital life? Was this emotional intimacy merely a stepping stone? Or had it already blossomed into something far more sinister? The shock of the discovery sent me spiraling into a state of emotional paralysis. I locked the tablet and sat in the darkness of our study, feeling as though the ground beneath me had vanished. The familiar safety of our marriage had been upended by the revelation of betrayal, a betrayal that struck at the very core of who I was and what I believed our relationship to be. I thought back to the many evenings we had spent discussing our dreams, our fears, and our hopes for the future. Each of those memories now felt tainted by the knowledge that they had been built on a foundation of hidden lies. In the days that followed, I began to notice additional signs that deepened the chasm between us. Sarah started to become increasingly guarded. She would leave the room abruptly when I entered, change the subject when I mentioned her appointments, and occasionally laugh nervously as if to cover up her discomfort. Our once effortless conversations devolved into strained exchanges filled with unspoken accusations and half-hearted reassurances. I tried to address the mounting tension, but every attempt to bridge the widening gap only led to more evasive answers. One afternoon, while I was preparing dinner, I overheard a conversation between Sarah and a friend on the phone. The words were vague but laced with a familiarity and warmth that was unmistakably intimate. It was then that I realized this betrayal was not confined to digital messages alone. It had seeped into every aspect of our lives, leaving no corner untouched. The psychologist, who was supposed to be a pillar of professional guidance, had become an unwitting accomplice in an affair that threatened to dismantle everything we had built together. The realization was devastating. I felt as if I were watching my own life unravel before my eyes, every lie peeling away the veneer of trust that had once defined our relationship. Anger, sorrow, and a deep sense of isolation mingled within me as I struggled to understand how a bond that had once seemed unbreakable could be so irreparably damaged. It was a painful paradox. The very tool meant to help heal Sarah's inner wounds had instead fanned the flames of betrayal, leaving me to grapple with the bitter taste of disillusionment. In that moment of utter heartbreak, I understood that the road ahead would be one of painful introspection and difficult choices. I realized that I was now faced with a crossroads, to confront the betrayal head-on, to demand the truth from the woman I had loved for so long, or to retreat into silence, burying my feelings and hoping that time would somehow mend the wounds. As the shadows lengthened outside our window that day, I resolved that I could no longer ignore the reality of our situation. The hidden affair had been unveiled, and with it, the promise of our future had been irrevocably altered. The inevitable confrontation arrived on a cold winter night when the accumulated tension within our home could no longer be contained. I had spent endless nights turning over the evidence in my mind, every detail of Sarah's secret communications burning like an accusation. That night, As the clock struck midnight and the world outside was blanketed in a heavy silence, I summoned the courage to face the truth head-on. Sarah was in our bedroom, her silhouette outlined by the dim light of the street lamp filtering through the window. I stood there for a moment, feeling as if every heartbeat was a countdown to the impending storm. Finally, unable to contain my anguish any longer, I spoke in a trembling voice, "Sarah, we need to talk." Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and resignation, met mine as she slowly turned to face me. In that charged silence, I could see the weight of unspoken words and hidden confessions in her gaze. "Michael," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, I didn't want you to find out this way." The admission sent shivers down my spine, each word confirming the betrayal I had long suspected. I demanded an explanation, a reason for why the sanctuary of our marriage had become compromised by an affair with the one person who was supposed to help us heal. Tears welled in her eyes as she admitted that what had started as innocent therapy had gradually evolved into something far more dangerous. The comfort, empathy, and understanding that Dr. Carter provided had become an emotional refuge for her, filling a void that she felt I was unable to reach. As she spoke, the room filled with a collision of emotions. Anger surged through me as I grappled with the magnitude of her betrayal, while sorrow and despair threatened to overwhelm me. "How could you let this happen?" I demanded, my voice raw with emotion. "We promised each other honesty and commitment. I trusted you with my heart, and now it feels like everything we built was a lie." Sarah's confession was punctuated by her own tears as she tried to explain that her heart had become lost in the labyrinth of her insecurities and unmet needs. In her quest for understanding and validation, she had found herself drawn into an intimacy that was forbidden and fraught with guilt. The conversation that night was long and excruciating, a painful unraveling of years of love and trust. We revisited moments of closeness and warmth, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when our connection had begun to fray. The psychologist, Dr. Carter, was mentioned repeatedly not as a healer but as a catalyst for this emotional betrayal. I questioned how a professional relationship could so easily devolve into an affair that undermined everything we once held sacred. The answers were murky, buried under layers of regret and human frailty. In the midst of the confrontation, I realized that our pain was not solely a product of infidelity, but also of our failure to communicate and understand each other's inner worlds. The man I once knew, the man who had shared my dreams and supported my aspirations, now felt like a stranger burdened by shattered expectations. And yet, as the rawness of the moment gave way to a fragile silence, I also saw in Sarah a reflection of her own anguish, a woman caught in the turmoil of her mistakes, desperately wishing for a way to mend what had been broken. We both knew that the journey ahead would be arduous. The wounds inflicted by betrayal do not heal overnight, and forgiveness is a path that must be tread slowly. The conversation ended with no grand declarations of reconciliation or promises of a miraculous return to the past. Instead, it concluded with a somber acknowledgement that the life we once shared had been irrevocably altered. In that cold winter night, amidst tears and trembling voices, we stood at the precipice of an uncertain future, one where the ghosts of betrayal would haunt our every step. In the weeks and months that followed our painful confrontation, our home transformed into a battleground of conflicting emotions. The air, once filled with shared laughter and the comforting hum of everyday life, now carried an undercurrent of regret, bitterness, and tentative hope. I found myself wandering through long, lonely nights, grappling with the dual realities of shattered trust and the possibility of eventual healing. I began attending my own therapy sessions, a quiet, solitary journey into the depths of my grief and anger. In those sessions, I was forced to confront not only Sarah's betrayal but also my own vulnerabilities and the ways in which I had perhaps contributed to our disconnection. The sessions were not about placing blame, but rather about understanding the intricate tapestry of emotions that had led us both down this painful path. I learned that betrayal is rarely the result of a single moment of weakness, but rather the culmination of many small, unnoticed fractures in a relationship over time. Sarah, burdened by overwhelming remorse, embarked on her own path of self-reflection and healing. She resumed her sessions with Dr. Carter, this time with a clarity that was marred by regret. Though I could not forget the betrayal, I began to see that her journey was also one of painful rediscovery, a quest to understand the void within her that had driven her toward a forbidden intimacy. There were moments when we would sit together in silence, each lost in our separate thoughts, silently mourning the loss of what once was. Yet, slowly, tentative conversations began to emerge, delicate attempts to rebuild a semblance of trust. Together, we started to re-examine the foundation of our marriage. We discussed our unmet needs, our hidden fears, and the ways in which we had both changed over the years. It was a process that required brutal honesty and immense vulnerability, a process that neither of us had ever been brave enough to undertake before. I came to understand that forgiveness was not an instantaneous act, but rather a gradual journey, a journey that might eventually allow us to reconcile the past with the possibility of a new beginning. In this long road to healing, I discovered that redemption was possible even in the face of profound betrayal. I learned to forgive not just Sarah, but also myself for clinging too tightly to an ideal of perfection that no relationship could truly sustain. The betrayal had scarred us both, but it also forced us to confront the reality of our emotional shortcomings. With every small step toward understanding and forgiveness, we began to lay the groundwork for a future that, while forever changed, held the promise of renewal. Our shared journey was not without setbacks. There were days when the memories of that fateful discovery and the raw pain of the confrontation would resurface, threatening to undo the progress we had made. Yet, in those moments, I reminded myself that healing is neither linear nor instantaneous. It is a mosaic of small victories, moments of genuine connection, and the hard-won realization that even in betrayal, there is the potential for personal growth. Now, as I reflect on the past year, I see our story as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the strongest bonds can be tested by hidden currents of unmet needs and unspoken truths. The betrayal inflicted by the unexpected liaison with a trusted psychologist has left an indelible mark on both our lives. But it has also given us the opportunity to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of renewed honesty and deeper understanding. Though the scars may never fully fade, I now believe that forgiveness, no matter how elusive, is the key to a future where we might once again rediscover the meaning of trust. As I write these words, I know that our journey is far from over. The road ahead will be filled with challenges and moments of uncertainty. Yet, I hold on to a fragile hope that our love, tested by betrayal and tempered by forgiveness, can evolve into something even more genuine and resilient than before. In this long, winding journey toward healing and redemption, we are learning that the most profound transformations often come from the deepest wounds. And perhaps, in time, we will find that the end of one chapter is merely the beginning of another, a chapter defined not by betrayal, but by the strength to rebuild and move forward.